Well, joining me now to discuss the situation on the ground in Kyiv is Peter Zalmayev. He is the director of a Eurasia Democracy Initiative, and we've reached him near Kyiv. Peter, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate your time.
Hello, John.
Lots we want to talk about across the country per se, but let's begin with this attack in the west near the Polish border on what appears to be an area used by NATO for training. What are you hearing about that?
Well, yes, this is, we just heard about this now. I have actually a friend there who's a journalist, a colleague of mine who has joined the territorial defense. He had just been relocated from there to Zaporizhia. Literally a day or two ago, and these are the barracks where he had been staying, and they were bombed pretty much into bits, just obliterated. This is showing us that Vladimir Putin has unleashed this full fury and terror against the whole of Ukraine. Obviously, he's concentrating on the south. He's concentrating on trying to, control Mariupol, which he's obliterating, along with the 200,000 civilians who are still there. He's going to try to attack Odessa, and Kyiv obviously remains the crown jewel in his strategy. But what we're seeing now is that he's increasingly targeting with the surgical strikes so far cities in the west, which we all thought would be, his last target. That would be relatively safe. Lviv, the area around Lviv, which is right up next to the Polish border, Ivano-Frankivsk, where my, relatives live, the city, the area which you mentioned. He is definitely pursuing the strategy of sowing panic countrywide. What is really particularly disturbing is that he's coming closer and closer to NATO's borders as he's doing it.
And that is a concern for NATO, of course. But as far as the average Ukrainian feels, how does this alter the equation and their whatever sense of safety they might have had in the western part of the country?
Well, he's, obviously people are having second thoughts. We're already seeing that people are starting to flee for the exits, mostly across the border to Poland. Poland is already, I think, has announced that it's stopping the refugee flow from Ukraine. It's pretty much saturated right now. Its absorption capacity is pretty much nil at this point. Over 2 million Ukrainians have left the country. So this is the other part of Putin's strategy. He's trying to increase the amount of humanitarian disaster and to increase the burden on European countries in order to force them to, in turn, try to force the Ukrainian government to come to the negotiating table on Russia's terms. So far, Russia has not budged. Its demands remain overbroad, ridiculous, demilitarization, denazification, essentially capitulation of Ukraine through other means, an installation of a puppet regime in Kyiv, etc., completely unacceptable. But Vladimir Putin is banking on increasing the amount of suffering and burdens on the Europeans to such a high degree that they would feel that there's no other way but to try to force some sort of diplomatic solution on, once again, Russia's terms.
Peter, I do want to try to squeeze in one more question here because you're on the ground and you have a great sense of what's going on. But for weeks, we watched that Russian military convoy on the outskirts of Kyiv. We understand that it is now moving, and we understand that Kyiv itself is threatened. Can you tell us what your understanding is of not only the deployment of Russians, but their ability to deploy? Because much was made of the fact that convoy was supposedly stalled, but now it seems to have, for whatever reason, become unstuck and is heading into Kyiv.
Well, I'm not sure it's really heading into Kyiv. Keep in mind, those folks have been sitting in those frozen vehicles and tanks and other heavy machinery for over 2 weeks now in frozen fields. They are out of supplies. The supply logistical problems have been tremendous. So they have been dispersed in order to stop being such an obvious target to Ukrainian Bayraktar drones, etc. They basically have scattered. Some are hiding in woods. It's still the assessment of most military experts, both in Ukraine and outside, that it's going to be tremendously difficult for Putin to invade Kiev. The forces, just the number of forces is simply not there. The morale is very low. It's very clear. So this does not mean it's going to be easy for Ukraine. In fact, it may be the opposite. Putin has increasingly resorted to desperate tactics of shelling civilian cities once again to try to sow panic, etc. So the days for Kiev, the days to come, are going to be very, very trying and difficult.
Peter, I want to thank you for your time. Stay safe, and we hope to talk to you again.
Thank you.